Honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong if a teenage boy has a crush on an older woman. It seems pretty normal and happens to the best of us. The issue arises when the older woman acts on it. Now, imagine you are a 54-year-old man and your wife is 48. Your 18-year-old daughter has finally left the nest, the last of your three kids. You have saved up for retirement and it's time to start enjoying it with your beautiful wife. After all, that's what you've been working for all these years. But then you discover a shocking secret. Your wife, the one you've loved so much, is having an affair with your 20-year-old nephew. Yes, it sounds unbelievable because it is. This 20-year-old is the son of my younger sister. I have two older brothers and one younger sister. My sister got married before any of us, but she had difficulty having children. Eventually, with medical interventions, she gave birth to my nephew. That's the difficult and painful situation I've been dealing with for the past few weeks. When my nephew was born, he instantly became everyone's favorite. We all embraced him even more than our own children because we understood the challenge our sister faced to bring him into this world. He was the golden child, the one whose every move brought chuckles of admirations. Growing up, he could do no wrong. Since he was around the same age as my children, it became customary for him to spend holidays at our house. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if the affair with my wife started earlier than she claims. The familiarity and comfort of our family gatherings might have provided the perfect backdrop for their relationship to develop. Yet, she insists that the affair began only recently. Ironically, one reason I never suspected anything was because I knew my nephew had always had a boyish crush on my wife since he was very young. It wasn't a secret. Everyone knew he had a soft spot for his big auntie, and we all found it cute. I distinctively remember a Thanksgiving dinner 5 or 6 years ago when all my siblings, their children and spouses attended. During the festivities, my nephew playfully threw a paper rocket at my wife as part of the fun. We all laughed, including me. However, something intriguing occurred when my wife caught the paper rocket. She read it, smiled, and crumpled the paper in her palm, holding on to it. I couldn't help but wonder if my nephew had written something on that paper. Her smile caught my attention, but I didn't give it much thought at the time. Later, after the event ended, I noticed that my wife had let go of the paper rocket, and it laid on the grass in my parents' backyard after the bench was removed. I assumed she had just released it, not realizing there might have been more to that moment than I initially thought. As we cleaned up after the event, I decided to pick up the crumpled paper to throw it away. Before tossing it, I unfolded the rumpled paper to see what had made my wife smile. I felt a mix of emotion when I saw that my nephew had written, "I love you," on the paper. Now, if it was another man that had written that, I would have kicked his ass. But a 14 or 15-year-old nephew at the time that was the golden child and was always fond of my wife was a different situation. So I didn't think much of it, just considering it was an innocent crush. I too had crushes when I was his age, so it seemed normal. Fast forward 6 months ago, my wife and I had a great marriage. We maintained a reasonable level of intimacy, having sex at least once a week, which was understandable given our busy lives. We never argued. Our understanding of each other made our relationship smooth. I envisioned a fantastic future that I was eagerly looking forward to. However, everything changed on that very day when I caught my wife in a lie. That lie set off a chain of events that continues to impact my life till this day. It was 6 months ago, on a Saturday. I was on the phone with my sister, who lived 3 hours away. She mentioned that her son's phone location shows he was at my house and around my area of town. It wasn't uncommon for my nephew to drive over to spend time with my older kids, though only my daughter was home at the time, and they weren't particularly close. I wasn't entirely sure because I had been busy and my wife had told me that she would be traveling for a day and a half to visit her family. Typically, when I get home from work, I go straight to bed, so I wouldn't have noticed if he had visited, especially with my spacious 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom house. I told my sister that I haven't noticed him since I was occupied. After ending the call with my sister, I wondered where my nephew was, if he was coming to my side of town or if he was already there, like his mother said. He must have dropped by to see me. The uncertainty lingered in my mind. I immediately called my nephew, asking him where he was without mentioning what his mom had just told me. He claimed he was still at school. I found it strange since his mom had his phone location and she said he was around my area. I thought maybe there was a mistake. I made the call out of curiosity, but his reaction on the phone made me feel like he was hiding something. He stammered and then mentioned he came by my area to see a friend and dropped by my house, but nobody was home. I questioned why he didn't call anyone. We would have rushed home to welcome him. He responded that he didn't want to bother anyone. Seemed odd, not wanting to prolong the conversation, as I sensed he was hiding something and not wanting to confront him. My intent was just curiosity, so I bid him farewell and hung up the phone. The uncertainty lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I am typically the type who likes to resolve and get to the bottom of things, given it was part of my job. So I took it a step further. In a nonchalant manner, I asked my daughter if she had seen her cousin since she's been home all day. She said no. I checked the Ring camera, and there were no signs of him visiting my house. It became clear that my nephew was lying. Since my wife hadn't been home since the day before, I didn't feel the need to ask her immediately. However, the fact that my nephew had lied bothered me. It kept running through my mind, trying to understand why he would lie about such a simple visit. The feeling bothered me so much that when my wife came home that Saturday night, I shared the story about how our nephew had lied, finding it strange. Surprisingly, my usually talkative wife was uncharacteristically quiet. For once, she didn't have anything to say or any opinion on that matter. The silence only added to the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. When I woke up the following morning, everything clicked in my mind. The absence of my wife on that Friday, when my nephew was supposed to be in my part of town, my nephew's well-known crush on my wife, and my wife's unusual silence when I asked her for her opinion on my nephew lying. For the first time in our 22-year marriage, I decided to snoop on my wife's phone to see if I can find any conversation between my wife and my nephew. Surprisingly, there was no text conversation at all. Thinking they might be using other forms of communication, I checked her Facebook Messenger, but there was no trace of conversation there either. Believing I might have been wrongfully suspecting my wife, I eased off and kept a watchful eye. One day, I was observing my wife texting. I noticed she was using an app I wasn't familiar with. Later, when I looked through her phone, I discovered the app was Snapchat, and the person she was chatting with most frequently was my nephew. The unsettling truth began to unfold. It turns out their conversation on Snapchat automatically deleted every 24 hours. The last conversation I managed to see included details about their affair. Armed with my wife's password, I accessed her password storage on her phone, downloaded Snapchat on my phone using her login credentials, and began uncovering their interactions. While they didn't text frequently, they exchanged nude photos and compliments. In a close call, while I was documenting evidence, I almost got caught when I took screenshots of the messages. Snapchat notified my wife that a screenshot had been taken. I watched as she confronted my nephew, accusing him of taking a screenshot. He denied it, but I could see my wife growing suspicious and eventually ceasing communication on the app. Realizing she was spooked, I knew I had to gather enough information to confront my wife. This revelation occurred about 4 months ago, and mentally preparing myself for the confrontation was challenging. I had kept these suspicions to myself for months, making the subsequent period extremely difficult for me. I didn't give her a chance to deny anything. I confronted her by lying to her that my nephew had exposed their affair to my sister with proof and screenshots from their Snapchat conversations. I wanted to provide her with the opportunity to come clean. The shock on her face was evident as she started crying, admitting that she had been attempting to end the affair. According to her, the affair had started a year ago, involving various activities including kissing and oral, but recently started penetrating. However, she claimed that it was during his recent visit that they first started penetrating. Her reasoning was that I was often busy and he gave her attention. In her weakest moment, she succumbed to it. It was the most difficult moment of my life, struggling to come to terms with the realization that my wife had been intimate with my nephew. Even though my wife thought my sister already knew, I knew I had to tell her, and our relationship would never be the same. Our close family would never be the same. The night after my wife confessed, she pleaded with me not to file for divorce, insisting that we could save our marriage. However, at that point, I wasn't even considering our marriage. My thoughts were consumed by how this news would devastate our family. That night, I called my sister and disclosed the affair between her son and my wife. She was horrified and immediately placed the blame on my wife, suggesting that she seduced him. I noticed that my sister was trying to deflect as much blame from her son as possible. As a mother, protecting her son was her first instinct, but I was disappointed that she didn't consider my feelings. Her immediate reaction was to shield her son. I told her directly that I expect her to ensure that our path never crossed and that her son should do whatever it takes to avoid me and my children. That's when my sister started pleading with me. In the back of my mind, I understood that the blame rested more on my wife. She was the one I had a commitment with, and why my nephew's actions could be partly blamed on raging hormones. It also indicates a lack of respect for me. My sister urged me to keep it a secret from our other siblings and parents, fearing that it would destroy our family and bring embarrassments. However, I disagreed. It seems she was trying to shield her golden son. As embarrassing as it might be, hiding the truth would only lead to more embarrassment when the news eventually surfaced. I pondered what I would say if people find out I divorced the wife I've loved so much. What would I tell my kids? How would we explain the absence of the golden nephew at family events? Keeping such a significant secret was out of the question. I knew conventional advice might be to refrain from reacting in the midst of emotions, but in my situation, I felt that holding this secret past the initial shock and embarrassment would only lead to more shock and embarrassment if everyone found out at different times. Against my sister's advice, I chose to tell my older siblings and my kids that very night. It's fair to say that everyone in my family now knows. My nephew has tried calling me several times to apologize, but I haven't picked up his calls. My kids have called him, expressing their anger, and my sister and relative have called me, crying about the situation. My sister even offered to come stay with me since my wife is moving out, but I prefer to be alone with my kids during this time. I don't want anything around me that would remind me of my soon-to-be ex-wife and my nephew. I'm still in the process of trying to recover, but it seems like a daunting task. Our once close family and extended family may be destroyed forever. Yes, I am definitely getting a divorce from my wife. However, I want to handle it in a way that doesn't put us in financial danger. To her credit, she's agreeing to everything I ask for and is making our separation as amicable as possible. It's not the path she would have wanted, but she feels she has no choice as everyone is now against her. The aftermath of this situation is overwhelming, and the future of our family has been irreparably altered. Thank you for staying to the end of this story. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me get your opinion on the comment section. Thank you and